Welcome to another edition of the ROTL UK podcast. We have a very special guest, as I think you can now will see. We have Erik Schlitt, the managing editor of Pride of Detroit, with us. If you followed us on from the wide receiver chat that we just had, thank you so much for staying with us. If you are new, just because you knew Erik was on the show, you are more than welcome. It's fantastic to have you along with us. Erik, along with my co-host Tom and Ant, thank you for coming on, Erik. It's a fantastic to have you here.
Look, I appreciate the invite, and I'm very excited to have a conversation with you, and spend the next hour or so just enjoying talking about the Lions.
In terms of all the guests that we have, I think the thing that I kind of focus on from the very starting point is that I've kind of, and it is something about podcasts in general, it's something a bit more intimate than like a radio show or anything like that. You kind of come to feel like you know that person really well. And yet you're always kind of coming in halfway through the story, because whatever's happened before, unless you're really committed and go through all of that, you don't know what's been said before, and you don't know what brought that person to this place. So I kind of want to start with who you are. And I know that Erik Schlitt is this almost kind of, I don't want to say mythical figure now, but like you, I think that in terms of what happens with our journalists that we may not name during all of this, but it was shown that you do have a massive swell of support from all realms of the Lions fan base. And so I think what I would say is maybe you started not late into journalism, but that you haven't been doing it that long, which I find absolutely crazy. So you started at Detroit Jock City in 2015, moving on to do Detroit Lions Breakdown podcast, and then Lions Wire pretty much at the same time, and then moving from Lions Wire to do Pride of Detroit. But you, for me, and I think a lot of people would agree, are regarded as one of the highest quality Lions journalists out there. And you've not been doing it long. So I don't know what you did before. In my research on you, I can't find anything. You don't have a LinkedIn or anything like that. I was like, oh my God, I don't know anything about this guy. So I know that you went to the University of Michigan. How did you start your college life? What did you major in? What was your career before you did what you do now?
Yeah. So I actually have a master's in social work from Michigan. Michigan is at the time was the number one school in the country for social work. And so I set my goals to go there. I got my master's in an accelerated program where I did it in a year. Basically took 3 semesters and was able to opt out of one because of my undergrad. And from there, I got a job in Hawaii right out of college. And when I was in Hawaii, it was a difficult job. And I worked in the schools, and at the time they weren't meeting the needs of the children of their special education population. And so my job was to basically come into a school and like reassess what they were doing right or wrong and try and implement some corrections. And I think you can, if you followed my football career, you'll my writing career, you'll see I'm very detail oriented, right? And so that really applied to that job. Like I was very detail oriented on how to do that. But it was difficult. I was going in telling people that they weren't doing their job right. It was a difficult work environment. And I actually, so this was back in like 2001, 2002 area. And it was actually at that time that I started following the draft a little bit closer, because I was looking for something to gravitate towards that I, wanted to study and learn, because the job, like I said, was difficult enough that I wanted to do something that I enjoyed. And so, and remember, the time difference for Hawaii is very different, right? They're much further behind. So I would wake up at 6 a.m. and I could watch the first football game of the day. And then you could get 3 football games in and then go to dinner. It was fantastic. Like, so you really could just absorb all this football. And so I started really getting into the draft and started studying it more. And I started writing like a newsletter for my buddies. Nothing big, just like, hey, this is where I think the team is. This is where I think they could go. Simple, just kind of generics type stuff. And then eventually I moved back home, and I took a job at a camp where I was running like a high ropes facility, like a team building facility. So it kind of, one of my focuses during social work was I was focused on team oriented things, like how to be successful as teams, how to utilize partners and lean on them and whatnot. And so I started doing that for a while, and eventually it kind of ran its course for me. And so I started looking back to get into the schools, and I went back and actually took a teaching job. Like there was a specialist job, and I taught for like 5 years. And from there, you really I learned a whole different aspect of like how to approach education and writing. And then I got married during that time. I had my first child during that time. And then we had our second child. And my first child had some delayed speeches and stuff like that, and so we had to start taking her to like speech therapists and other appointments and whatnot. And so what I did was I actually stopped working and to take care of the baby and my oldest. And when we did that, I was so focused on my family that I didn't have like anything for myself. And my wife said, "Hey, you should apply to write somewhere, just something as like a hobby to get you out into the real world again. And so you're not so consumed by these children all the time." And I was like, it's okay. It's a good idea. Nothing special. Just, I decided to write an article and submitted it to Detroit Shock City, and or their parent company, and said, "Hey, this is what I'm interested in writing," and they accepted me. And then that's where I cut my teeth. I spent about a year and a half working there, learning just some of the nuances of what it means to write online and how it's different from writing, like professionally, like I had in my other job. And from there, I just started writing articles that I think people gravitated towards. Like it was a little bit different. It was a little bit different perspective. I wrote about stuff that I wanted to read about, like that I wanted to hear about. And if everyone, has always said, write what you're interested in, and the people your readers will pick up on that. And so that's what I did. I wrote about things that no one was really writing about that I liked. And I started to get a little bit of a fan base, and I made a couple connections with some other writers, and then, things start to build, and very quickly doors started to open up for me, much faster than they really should. And it wasn't long before USA Today then was starting their website, and they were looking for a number 2. And then they said, "Hey, are you interested in doing that?" And I got a real fast education on how to be a professional writer through them. And Ty Schulter was the who was running the site at the time. He really helped me understand how to write and how to get your message across, because like in a concise manner. Because when I used to write 3,000 word articles that was ridiculous, and no one needed to read that everything I wanted to say I could have said in 500 words, but I felt like I had to over justify everything, and these articles were ridiculous. And so I found my voice a little bit more. I created more angles. I created more storylines. I started bringing more of my organization into it, and it just kept going. Jeff Risden then helped open some doors for me. Ty Schulter, and very quickly, I was in a spot where I was growing on social media, and then the Lions offered me credentials, and that really helped things take off. And then the opportunity came to write with Jeremy. I couldn't really pass that up. It was a better opportunity for me in a lot of different ways. It fit my style of writing. I think Jeremy and I are very cohesive together, and we had talked about how to merge ourselves together at some point to be an efficient duo. And the opportunity came up, and we decided to take it and go with it. And that was about a year ago. So been in the role here at Pride of Detroit as the managing editor for a year. It was an increase in my responsibilities and a bigger platform and opportunity to do a whole bunch more stuff. But I've now been credentialed for 5 years, and when I first started writing at Jock City, I had 22 followers on Twitter, right? And I think Math Bomb was number 23, and then like from there, now I've got 16,000 or something like that, or 15. I'm not even 100%, but it's taken off quite a bit, and again, I owe a lot of credit to people opening doors for me. But it's a lot of work. You have to have that mentality and that drive in order to do what we do, because the pay is not great. And you have to have the time, right? And this is a job where you have to be able to be available to write at odd hours and be available to, look, you guys are up late right now, right? I'm certain, like, I don't know the exact time difference, but it's got to be awfully late for you guys. And so I appreciate you taking the time in order to have me on. So it's a fun job, and it affords my lifestyle with my children and my obsessive need to want to know everything I can about the Lions and the NFL. And it's great. I'm really excited to be able to do what I do. And whenever I get a chance to talk to people, I want to take that opportunity. And so I appreciate you inviting me on here today.
Thank you for going so in depth into that. I would have expected nothing less, but just want to shout out your Patreon as well now. And the thing is, like you say, it's not the best paid thing in the world. And I mean, us guys here are not doing it full time, so it's really a hobby for us, but it's something different. So the Detroit Lions Breakdown podcast has a Patreon. You can subscribe for as little as $1 a month, but if you go for $4, then you can get access to Erik's draft big board. So obviously the draft is just over a month and a day away. If you want to get access to Erik's draft board, just need to go onto patreon.com/Detroit Lions Breakdown Podcast, or Det Lions Breakdown Podcast, or some variant of that. But please do that and support the best journalist on the beat. So, like you said, you made the transition from Lions Wire to Pride of Detroit, and you said that fit your writing style better. And I was actually going to ask you about that before you mentioned it, because I was going to say something along the line. I know that USA Today are potentially restrictive and prescriptive in what needs to be written, what must be written, but also that you are detail orientated and don't like to. I want to be kind with this. Pride of Detroit puts out a huge amount of content, and I did not think that fit with your style either, because I feel like you focus more on quality rather than quantity. Not that Pride of Detroit don't put out quality articles, that's not what I mean, but Jeremy and his staff work incredibly hard putting out a huge amount of content. So how do you think that fits you best? How has it changed for you now? Do you find yourself writing more articles that you maybe wouldn't have written at Lions Wire?
So part of the job at Lions Wire was I had to be available to write like newsers and quick articles. Every time that a player was signed, we had a task of lists that we had to go through, and writing quickly is not my strong suit. That's very much Jeremy's strong suit. And by blending together, it offered us an ability to work off each other's strengths, right? So it took off some of the things that I struggled with, like getting news out quickly. When I was competing against Jeremy to get an article out because a player was signed, I think I would beat him to publishing 1 out of every 100 times. Like I never beat him. He's just so fast and so quick on how he wants to organize things. But I had someone tell me once that they read my articles not for how timely I put them out, but because of the thoroughness of them. And so that gave me the pause to say, okay, I don't need to be first. I want to focus more on being able to add the details in that mean something to me. And so I've been able to do that at Pride of Detroit. Is I write less articles than I did at Lions Wire, but I write more in depth and more meaningful articles, I think. And so it takes me more back to my roots, which was I want to write more analytical pieces. I want to go in depth on things like salary cap and like roster management and stuff like that. And so I've been able to get rid of some of the stuff that I thought was burdensome. And when news breaks, if I jump in there and the system that we have, you can you and multiple people working in an article at the same time. And so like when news breaks and Jeremy's just flying through writing his stuff, I'll just he spaces down and gives me spot, and I'll just add stuff in about the player, and then he'll just work them into his article, and then away he goes, and it's beautiful. And then when I want to do mine, he gives me pointers on like how I can organize things, and it's a really nice marriage on how to work, and it allows me to, like I said, be more detail oriented. I head up the draft stuff, and I pass out assignments, and I organize things, and so it's a very different job behind the scenes, and I get to do more stuff that I enjoy.
Collaborative approach. Where have we heard that before? Sorry, Anne.
No, I was going to say. So you got the promotion about a year now. How's that first year gone for you there? And what's sort of been biggest challenge you've had so far today? So it's big step up, I guess. Pride of Detroit, they're looked at as one of the primo places when it comes to Lions content. How's it all gone that first year?
It's good because I've known most of the guys on staff prior to them even joining Pride of Detroit. Like if we go back to pre-credentialed times, like 5-6 years ago, there was a time, there were a couple of seasons where myself, Alex Reno, Ryan Matthews, Kent, Matt Baum, and a couple other writers would all sit in the stands together, and we would watch practice, like a training camp. We'd all go to practice, and the bunch of us would just sit in the stands, and we would watch practice, and we would be like, "Did you see that? Or did you see that?" And we would actually ping pong back and forth ideas off of each other and analyze players, and so I've known these guys for a really long time. So when I came into the job, they were familiar with me. So it wasn't like I was coming in and trying to assert my authority or anything. Like they knew who I was. They knew the type of work that I do. And they were excited to bring me on board. And so that made everything really easy. From a personality standpoint, I'm a little bit older. So I'm not as I'm not as hip to some of the things that they do. You know what I mean? Like to sound even older right there. But like the stuff that they can do from a technology standpoint is impressive. Like the Photoshop and Twitch and like just all the stuff that they can do is super impressive. And that's stuff that I can't. And I enjoy being a part of that. So hardest part has just, I don't know. We try and put out so much. We want to put out as much content as possible. We want to be an encyclopedia, right? Like if someone wants to know something that happened with the Lions during the year, we want to have an article on it, essentially, right? So like if you want, I often use the site as a resource where I'm like, okay, I need to know how many games this guy missed, or when was he injured, or we have it set up in a manner that I can go back and I can look, and it's almost like a Rolodex of articles, essentially. And so establishing that, adding my own kind of unique take. I'm a lot more, again, organization is one of my strong points. And so I organized the draft last year and ideas on how to cover it more efficiently. I think we ended up having like 120 articles on the 7 players that were drafted and like a couple of the UDFA ones. But like we really wanted to cover every aspect of the team as much as we can. But But at the same time, we also want to be able to give articles out there that are consumable, that are on complex topics, like how schemes work, or how the salary cap works, or why they might not need to look at a certain position because of the depth there. And we're still working it out. We're still trying to figure out how to be as efficient as we are, or as we can be. And we'll make some changes going into next season. But it's I'm very optimistic on the progression that it's going. I can tell you that, like, we've seen an uptick in reads, right? And we've seen more people coming to the site, more people clicking through different articles, and that's really what you want at the end of the day. You want to be able to show that you're reaching an audience, and I think we're able to do that.
Fantastic. Tom, any questions about Erik personally before we move on to the Lions?
I don't think so. I was just thinking how lucky it would be to be that random fan who turned up to a practice session and had the four of you behind breaking down every single play. And he was probably there thinking, "Oh, those guys behind don't know what they're talking about." You know.
We've got loads of questions coming in. Sorry,
please.
so say Erik.
No, I was going to say there were fans exactly like that. I promise you, because we're not quiet. You know, we're all of us are in this business because we're opinionated, right? And we have ideas, and we would have discussions and say, this is why I like this, or this is why I don't. And we're not always going to agree, which is a fun part about it as well.
Let's move on to talking about the Lions, and then we'll talk about the draft. So we got a question from our own Ryan McCluskey, who couldn't make it this late. As you say, it is late over here, almost 11 o'clock in the evening now. But he said, who should call plays on offense this coming season? Obviously, Dan Campbell was the de facto offensive coordinator down the stretch, but there has been a promotion in that position in the offseason. What do you think will be different this year, and what has Dan learned by being that de facto OC through the back half of the year?
Yeah, I think for Dan, he's definitely going to be learning. He definitely learned, like, how a coordinator position works, because you got to remember, he's never really held that before, right? He's been a interim head coach before, but he's never had that coordinator role. So I think it was a really good educational experience. And you saw for him, you saw how it took him a few games to get his feet wet before he was able to really get to the spot where he wanted to be. And then he got more comfortable. And I think that will help him be a better head coach, because I do think he's going to pass the duties on, right? I think that he's going to want to stay into a supervisory type role. Now, head coaches always have that opportunity to overrule a play or suggest a certain strategy at different points of the game. And I think being a coordinator for the back half, it's going to help him get better perspective on that. But I do think he's going to pass the duties on and allow some of the younger coaches to have bigger roles.
There we go. All right. Tom, you're going to take Dan's question. Dan Pask has asked us a question because he is the best Lions fan of any Lions fan. He's asking questions on your podcast, on Pride of Detroit, on our podcast. Tom.
Yeah, Dan's awesome.
It always makes me smile when I hear his name called out on your podcast. Right, so from Dan, it's a simple one. He's saying, which Lions off-season moves have surprised you? I guess either moves that they've done or maybe moves they haven't done as well.
I mean, returning Jarrad Davis was certainly a surprise, right? I'd say that's probably the biggest surprise. Like, it wasn't overly surprising that they weren't as aggressive. We kind of knew they'd add a receiver. They think they're in better shape at safety, I think, than everyone else does. And so again, the second offseason, not really doing much at safety isn't overly surprising. I think their lack of addressing safety, lack of really addressing linebacker on a big level, and not really replacing Trey Flowers are really good indicators that those are three positions that they're going to want to address in the draft. But yeah, the most surprising, Jarrad Davis certainly was the one that caught me off guard. I was not really prepared for that one when we got that news.
Were you expecting they'd bring Jalen Reeves-Maybin back? I think he was the one from my side that I thought more likely would come back versus some of the ones they did bring back.
Yeah, remember, Jalen Reeves-Maybin was at the Senior Bowl with them in the stands with the Lions scouts, going over like exactly like different things that were happening on the field. And so I thought that was a clear indicator that they were going to bring him back. Unfortunately, I think he probably got more money than they wanted to offer him. And they end up signing Chris Board instead, right?
All right. Let's see what our next one is. Ant, do you want to ask Ash's question?
Okay, well, I don't know how much you know about the NFL scene over here, but Ash goes, what do you think of the profile of the NFL in the UK, and how could you see it developing over time? Obviously, you know, NFL franchises, they're getting overseas markets and that now. They're trying to expand the game. You know, how do you see that developing?
Yeah, I mean, there's been talks about expanding for a while now, right? Because there's obviously a fan base, and the fan base is growing. Like, I don't know. It's still hard for me to understand like how different people get tied to different teams, right? Like, I mean, I'm very interested to see like how you guys got tied to the Lions. And now from some of the people I've talked to, it's been, oh, I went to the game versus Atlanta where Prater kicked the extra point, but it got penalized, and then he kicked the extra point and they won, right? Like, and that was how I got hooked on the Lions. But other than the Lions haven't been over there in a while. So I'm very interested on how the fandom does create, because I don't know. I know that it's growing, and I know that the NFL wants to tap into that market. But I mean, like, honestly, like, I don't know how you guys latched on it. That's fascinating to me.
I mean, does anyone want to answer that? Because, I mean, we've gone into that before, obviously, but it's something I guess perhaps some people are here because Erik is here, and perhaps they haven't heard why we're here. So... And Tom, I mean, Tom maybe hasn't answered that question before because you're relatively new to us. So,
yeah, I'm not sure if I have. So I can't support good teams, which is kind of, as you can imagine, especially in the UK, you don't get as much NFL content as you would compared to other sports. So you see a lot of people gravitate towards the Patriots, the Packers, etc. That's just not how I like to support teams. They've got to kind of get me in the feels in some way. And that as a combination with a team that had such like a pained past 50 years, I actually thought was quite British in a way. Not that we've had like a pained 50 years or anything like that. It's more whether it's English football teams, or there was an old English tennis player called Tim Henman who was not that talented, but he'd always just about kind of get to a semi-final and then come crashing down for some reason.
He tried really hard.
Exactly. And I was then thinking, there's almost something about this team which I love. The fact that they keep finding new ways to lose that no other team has ever lost. And then actually gravitated to the fact that at the time they had a young quarterback who was interesting. They had Megatron. They had a team that was on the up. And so within a couple of years of me following, it was that. So I started following really in 2013 and 2014. That's probably the best team I'd say we've had since I've followed, but the best team in the last 10 years or so.
Sure.
So it was kind of that perfect combination of a kind of historic franchise down on their luck. I personally almost got into the NFL draft as much as I did the NFL originally. Almost similar to your story there. I remember avidly watching kind of Khalil Mack videos in my hotel room at the time. So yeah, it was just a combination of that. I don't think it hurt that the Lions were quite often picking high in the draft, and yeah, that was my story.
You know, and I think there's an opportunity for more fans now for the Lions, especially with Hard Knocks coming up, and then now the draft. I know you guys talked about it on your podcast earlier, but I really think the Lions have more than they get credit for. And so I think there's a lot of appeal out there, and whether it's a certain player or a creative way of losing, whatever it is, I do think the Lions are a team that I think more people will start to gravitate towards as well, which would be great for you guys, right? Grow your fan base.
I think it's the community as well, more than anything. You know, historically the franchise has not been so successful. It's not, you know, a lot of bandwagon fans who are in it for all the Super Bowls and all the flashy, the glitz, the wins and everything. It's a very dedicated community. I mean, one that has taken us in and they don't even care. They know the fact that we're British and that they've been very welcoming to us. You all come on here and grace us with your time as well when it's like, oh, there's just a few Brits over there talking about this. But I do think that's one of the big appeals, especially at the minute, especially the new phase we're going into now, where the team's going to do potentially really well. I think that really stands out for them.
I mean, at least there's promise. And I mean, there's underrated things about the Lions in the UK, like the lion is the national symbol of England,
Right.
Which, I mean, I don't think it gets talked about very much over here, but there's so much appealing about Detroit. I was over there on Thanksgiving, and I saw the Bears game, and I watched the University of Michigan against Ohio State as well. That was a fantastic trip.
Yes.
But there's such a nice vibe about the city, and I was talking before in the previous podcast we were talking about wide receivers, how the city has really kind of resurged, at least kind of from what I regarded as what its reputation is and where it is now. And I was saying how there's the travel publication called Forbidden Planet. Is it called Forbidden Planet? Yes, Forbidden Planet. And they were saying, top places to go in the world. And Detroit in 2020 was number 4 in the world. Like,
Wow.
That is internationally how the city is regarded in terms of the fact that there's this sort of renaissance in the city where it's been vacated by a lot of people in the last, kind of decade after the city went bankrupt and whatever happened. And now people are coming back and with it a new kind of culture. And it's exciting to be a fan at this point in time because the bandwagon fans can come later on, but right now you've got the hardcore people, and that's fine.
Yeah, it's nice to get in on the ground floor. I wrote in my my 5 things I'm interested in watching on Hard Knocks. The last point that I made was, it's good for the city. I'm very interested to see the city shine in a national spotlight in a positive way, because there are a lot of people that still regard the city as, a problem. And sure, like any city, there's going to be problem areas, but it's not the the squalor that, people once think it was, you know what I mean? And there are a lot of things that have changed and evolved, and it's very unique. And there's a lot of really cool things that are there. And so I'm excited that the city is going to get that opportunity to shine a couple of times now with the draft as well.
So if you notice also a real sea change in terms of optimism around there, obviously you've been doing this a while, you've been through a lot of regimes now, and at least from over here, it seems like there is a lot of optimism around for the first time in a while. Is that sort of the same as you noticed that in this last year?
Yeah, one of the things that people really liked about Caldwell was he was a player's coach, right? And so he was someone that players wanted to play for. The difficulty with Caldwell was that he was kind of tapped out in how far we think he could go. I don't think he bought too much into coaches, and he doubled down on some really bad ones, and it really limited the ceiling, I think, in which the team could go, because they hitched their wagon to some people that really didn't have a high ceiling professionally, whether it was a coach or a player or whatnot. And so then with Patricia, it's it completely flipped, right? It was Wildy, hard-nosed style, work in Detroit. And when you look at the fact that it's a blue collar city, people were optimistic, but he quickly isolated very happy players that were part of the franchise and cornerstones of the franchise. And it's taking now a couple of years just to undo all the problems that he, caused with Patricia and Quinn. And now you're getting Campbell, who is, again, you flip back to the players coach. The difference here is that I think Campbell's not as married to his coaches, right? I think everything is very competition based. And so he wants his coaches to do well. And if they're not doing what they need to do, then they're going to be moved on from. And we saw that once already this offseason, where they moved on from their linebackers coach and they made a switch over to another coach. They're going to lose coaches through promotions. Like Aaron Glenn's going to get a promotion at some point. I mean, that's inevitable. It sure seems like Aubrey Pleasant's going to get a defensive coordinator position at some point. Maybe he's Glenn's replacement. Maybe he ends up going somewhere else. But when you harvest a coaching staff that is being held accountable and can elevate themselves to higher level positions, well, more coaches are going to want to come to there, and you're going to get new coaches in, and if they aren't doing it, then they're going to get moved on from as well. And so it's a different style of accountability, I think, than what Caldwell held. Caldwell everyone loved him. I mean, everyone loved him, but there wasn't as much accountability. And I think that's a huge difference with Matt Patricia. And I think that's why, or with Dan Campbell as opposed to Matt Patricia. And so I think that's a huge reason why people are a little bit more optimistic. Now, they've got to nail this draft in order to keep that optimism going, right? Because you've gone into this offseason, you've basically towed the line. Maybe, you added Chark, but I mean, beyond that, you really haven't done a whole lot. You've filled in some needs and, replaced a couple of guys, but you've added a little bit more improvement on depth. But you have to hit on these picks, and the way that this team is organized. And I think the game plan is that they're going to try and build through the draft and just try and upgrade as many spots as they can, so that a year from now, half their roster is guys that they've acquired through the draft or as undrafted free agents. And then you've got a nice base of players that have played, and then you can take big steps after that. But I think you've got to do that. If you do that, then he's just, this coaching staff, this front office is just going to get even more optimism that they can be successful. But offseason is not over yet. They've still got one really big step to do before they can say that they're continuing to progress forward.
I mean, at the end of the day, Campbell's trusting the GM to get it done, and accountability, like you said. I think our first-time visitor, Alien Vivitor on Twitch, has put it best by saying Dan Campbell is a players and coaches coach, which I think perfectly describes him, actually. Got a question from Ian Carr on our WhatsApp group, who's asking, there appears to be some quality free agents left unsigned. Do you think the Lions are going to be picking up anyone else pre-draft, or are the Lions largely done at this point?
I think they're really close to done. And there's a couple of reasons. If you look at their roster right now, they have 79 players on the roster. Then you add in their 9 draft picks, that puts them at 88. Well, it's a 90-man roster, so they only have 2 more spots beyond those 9 picks, and we all know that they're going to get more UDFA guys than they're not just going to get 2 UDFA guys and then call it a day. They're probably going to get like 8 to 10 of those guys. And if they get 8 to 10 of those guys, then, the lowest man at that position is probably going to be removed. But when you're playing this tight to the roster limits, there's not a whole lot of room left. Then you look at the cap space that they're in right now. They're still in okay space. They've got about 26 million or something like that, but you've got 5 picks in the top 100. That's going to take up a huge chunk. I think it's like 23. And so that's going to take up like 13 of your 23 million, which is going to take you down to 10. Some GMs like to keep 10 for your in-season moves. Some go a little bit lighter at 5 or so, but it's typically between 5 and 10. And last year Holmes went a little lighter, and then he ended up getting pinched at the end, and he had to rework Vitai's contract in the second to last week of the season. And so he might be more, apt to want to leave himself a little bit more cushion, right? And if he's saying, hey, I want to leave myself 10, and I've got 13 coming my way in my draft class, and I'm at 23 right now, I might be done. Now, could they add a guy? I certainly like it. I'd certainly like to upgrade wherever we can, but I don't think they're feeling any pressure to add a guy. But I think if the opportunity arises and if the price is right, they could, but they're right up against it from a cap and roster space standpoint.
There we go. Okay, we are getting loads and loads and loads of questions live, and I'm going to try and get to all of them. I know that the quick fire round is not your specialty, but we're going to try and get there with all of them. Tom, you've got the next one.
Yeah, you mentioned the Quintricia regime, and I'm sure it wasn't the most positive working environment to follow the team around then. But I'm sure there have been some memorable moments. So what have been your most memorable moments covering the team in the last few years?
You know, one of the things that I really liked about the Patricia Quinn era was when they drafted Tracy Walker, and I saw something in him as a rookie that I really enjoyed, and I was able to bond with him really early to the point where now I feel like I could walk up to him at any point and ask him a question, and I saw him, like, his career was going the wrong way with Patricia's coaching, and I'm happy to see that it has rebounded. Right, it's nice to see when you put the time in on a player that you see that player be successful. Like, that's an exciting part for me. I really enjoyed things like when they do joint practices, because you get to see unique players. Watching Tom Brady practice is a real treat. And so there's just the access that I get that is really cool. And, and then you take the positives of the winning moments too. You take Carry-On's 100-yard game, rushing game, like that hadn't happened in so long that was an enjoyable moment. You take that week 3 game against the Patriots where they, did the impossible and beat them. Like, that was a great moment. Like, and to be in the, in Ford Field, to experience that with the rest of it, like, those are exciting. Those are fun times. And it's palpable. Right. And so those were some of my favorite moments from that era.
And why don't you pick one from the next one?
Yeah, I was just about to say, obviously, the big news today, we've had 2 big bits of news out about Hard Knocks and the draft. What's your initial reaction to those? And did it include, oh God, my work's gone up 5-fold now Detroit's got both of them coming
initially?
Up.
Initially. That was the first thing I said to Jeremy was, holy cow, we're going to have to work so much harder. But I embrace it. I'm excited to see is another angle of the team, right? I know that they're still going to be, they're not going to show us everything, right? But they're going to give us different angles that we don't get access to. And as much access as we get to the organization, we're still limited. Like, there's still certain areas of the building we don't get to go to. We're not, schmoozing with the front office people. And so that's a fascinating part of the business that I really want to learn more about. And I think the Hard Knocks show will give us an opportunity to get a little bit more behind the scenes. And I love that. I love it. Every aspect of that.
Just had a comment on Twitch from Laura Schlitt. Don't know if you know who she is, but she said that her favourite moment has been the City and Lions community at large stepped up during the Mike Silver comments. This community is unlike any other. I was going to touch on Mike Silver, decided not to. You now have. So thank you for the comment. And I mean, I think it was a really nice moment for every Lions fan, because at the end of the day, the fan base is, much like probably every fan base, incredibly divided on pretty much everything. Who to take it 2, who to take it 3, when it was a couple of years ago and Okuda was there, and there are a few other prospects at that time that people wanted, and is Quintricia the way to go forward? Dan Campbell doesn't know what he's talking about, or he does, and he's a genius, but then Mike Silver did the impossible and united everyone, and I, like I said, it's a quick fire round, and you've already addressed this before, but it in a really perverse way was spectacularly cathartic to see everyone kind of go, no, this guy's great, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, it was very humbling, because I didn't anticipate that. Like, it lasted days. I mean, days of just people coming out and I know that there's a big fan base that enjoys what I do, and I mean I appreciate it, but I guess I didn't realize how big it was until that moment. It was awfully impressive, and I really wanted to get involved and say some things back, and thought, I probably shouldn't, and then the fans did it for me. And that was an awesome moment to know that I didn't have to come to my own defense, because I had all these, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people doing it for me. And it was awesome. I don't know. I can't even like say how cool of a moment it was, but it was, I still, like, days later, it was like people were still coming to my defense and telling him that he needs to stay out of Detroit, and just a lot of really great support.
I've just had a message saying, do we go on to draft? And we've got like 10 more Lions questions and then draft questions, and I know that we're short on time.
It's all right.
Let's
keep going.
Okay, right. So Don Burt on YouTube asks, if health permits, is there someone you are a believer in this group of second-year players that might break out? So I'm guessing that Levi is potentially the guy there, but also maybe Melifonwu. Are you a believer in these guys, or do you worry about them for year two?
No, I think Levi's back was a big issue for him, and I think that really put him behind. But I do think the potential is there for him. Of the second-year guys, I still think Aleem is nowhere near his highest ceiling. I think Aleem is just a monster waiting to get unleashed, and he showed it in camp, but and it was a little bit more subdued, but he started to unleash it again at the end of the year. I think that carries over, and I think Aleem's going to be a real problem next year.
We won't talk about Jordan Davis, but
pair him up. Take them, pair them up, put them together. Okay. I don't care. I don't care. I love the trench work, man. My goodness. I mean, Aleem is if you ever get to go to training camp, watching him and Ragnow face off 1-1 is a joy. It was one of my favorite parts of training camp last year.
I bet. Tom, your question.
Yeah. So this is from Quirky Zerky, I want to say, on Twitch. But the question is Goff second half of the 2021 year Goff, or is it first half? And can he be the QB of the future? So which Jared Goff are we getting in 2022?
I mean, you hope it's the second half, right? And you look at the fact that he didn't have a lot of weapons, and you've upgraded some of those. You're going to be as good as the offensive line was. You're upgrading the offensive line as well. And so if you can give him the big knocks on Goff were, if he's pressured, he's not as successful. If you give him time, then he is. Well, look, adding Frank Ragnow back to the mix is just going to give him more time, right? I mean, so I definitely think a second half Goff is very reasonable to expect to start next season.
How much did the confidence play into his first half? So obviously, he got discarded by the Rams. He got blamed for all their faults. He gets landed in Detroit. The fans weren't too happy about it, I guess, across the board. Do you think that really could have explained sort of really how bad it was to begin with, and maybe it might not be as bad as that?
No, certainly. And they could not get on the same page in the first half of the season. I mean, you could see it in training camp. They were awful in training camp. He could not connect with Perryman or Williams, and I mean, those guys didn't end up doing anything in the season anyways, right? But those were the guys that were expected to be the contributors, and he could not find them. And he ended up finding Cephas more, right? And now you're returning Cephas. Now you're adding Chark. Now you've got second half St. Brown as well. Like, you've got a lot, and you didn't even have Hawkinson in the second half for the most part, right? Like, so you add Ragnow back, you add Hawkinson back. I definitely think his confidence is going to be higher. And I do think that played a factor in the first half for sure.
And do you want to take the next one from Carlton Wood?
I was just going to quickly add to that one. You mentioned obviously about seeing Goff in the preseason, and that one thing you did write about recently was the offensive linemen like Evan Brown, Tommy Kramer, saying that they might not be up to starter scratcher in there, but they all came in and did a tremendous job. I mean,
Yeah.
Hank Fraley, what a job he's doing there. What did you get a feeling? There's a lot in store for his future because he seems to, in the last 2 years, he's given us a line we've just not had forever. And what's he doing to these players? He said they might not be ready to play in the preseason, but they came in and we didn't know Ragnar was missing for the most part.
His re-signing to a retention with the new coaching staff was a massive deal. Like I was super excited about it. We got the word of it. And it took him a couple of days to announce it, but I was super excited because Hank, again, he understands the game. He played center. The centers in the NFL are so intelligent. Like it's unbelievable how smart they are, and they have to be to understand like everything that they do. And Frank knows how to tap into these guys. And yeah, I look, ideally, this is the type of thing you want, and you want to draft another guy and put him at left guard and see if he can beat out Logan Stenberg. And so that you have a new guy and Evan Brown and Kramer just waiting, right? Like you want to be able to just roll guys so that if someone does leave in free agency, you have his replacement. And if you can do that with your offensive line, my goodness, your offense is just going to be able to be that much more successful.
I mean, just on a side point, I was really surprised that Evan Brown got re-signed underneath the second round tender.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Cool. And sorry.
Yeah, so just switching on a tangent now. Obviously you do a lot of the cap situation there. You're a bit more that. Carlton Wood asks, he says, is unmovable players or more dead money, is that going to be inevitable the way the contracts have been restructured now? Because obviously a lot of teams are starting to use void years, etc. Is this going to be the norm going forward? Lots of dead from players who are no longer there, or players we just can't move because they're restructured so much.
I think the dead money, but with avoided years, is definitely a trend that's going to take place in the future, and I think it works because the cap should keep going up, right? Heaven forbid there's not another pandemic, right? That eliminates everything again, right? But the league was wildly successful, and they're growing into an even bigger monster, and they're just making more and more money, and the cap should keep going up and up and up. And if you don't have to use the voided years, then I don't think they're going to, but in certain situations it makes sense to do it, right? Like with Chark, you want to keep his number low because you don't want to have too much invested in him this year, and you want to be able to carry some over, so you push some money into the future. Well, it's not that big of a deal if the money keeps going up. Plus, if you save his money now, so with the voided years, if you push that $6 million into the next year and you're holding on to it right now, and then you don't use it, that money just gets rolled over into next year anyways, right? So you're just basically holding it until next year. And then if you do need it, well, then you use a little bit of it, and you still have a little bit more that you can still apply to it next year as well. So it's an aggressive way to add players. And I think you can get in trouble if you do it too often. Like there's certain teams that definitely are overusing it right now because they have to. But I think if you use it strategically and you spread things out, you absolutely can keep doing that because of the way that the system is designed, and the way and the expectations that with new TV deals and whatnot coming in, that the money will keep going up.
I guess it's one of those. Sorry, just to say, I guess it's just one of those things in terms of roster building where some people will go through a boom and bust cycle and a 1-year reset, saying we're going to aim for a Super Bowl in 4 years' time, and structure the contracts to aim for that in 4 years' time, and then have a 1-year reset and then go for another 4-year cycle. And then some people are going to aim for a dynasty where that's not possible if you want sustained success, because you look at New Orleans and it just can't happen that long. Sorry, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, do you think the value of people like, so Mike Disner in our case, who I'm going to oversimplify his role and call him a salary cap guy, but you expect to see an increased focus on roles like that, potentially even general managers starting to move more that way, and obviously having, they need football scouting within the building, but almost running it as much more of a business and trying to use the salary cap in that way.
Yeah, and Disner's role is essentially like a business. His role is to work with Brad Holmes. Like, he cut his teeth as a salary cap guru. Like, that's how he got into the NFL. He was targeted by Forbes as one of the top. Like, they did a 30 30 NFL executives under 30 years old. He was on that list. Like he was identified as a smart, intelligent, up and coming guy. And the Lions just happened to bring him home because he's from the area, right? And so they brought him in. It was actually Quinn who brought him in, but his role has expanded to the point where he actually is splitting his duties, half of them with Brad Holmes and half of them with Rod Wood. So he is heavily involved in that business aspect. And I think he takes that approach through in both parts of his job.
The question from Lions Lee on YouTube, he said, who do you think are going to be the stars in Hard Knocks?
Oh, in my column, I wrote like 30 guys. Like honestly, there's so many different guys that look, Jamal Williams is of course an obvious one, right? Like Jamal Williams is going to take the cake, but you can go through and identify like a ton of different people that are interesting. Jason Kabinda was on the Raiders in 2019 when they were on Hard Knocks, and he was a big story arc for them. And then he got cut in the last episode. Well, now his career has been revived in Detroit. Like they can easily roll back into that and talk about how his career is new. Goff and Michael Brockers. This is their third time on Hard Knocks in the last 7 years because LA was on it twice, right? So like there's a storyline with them. The Rams just won the Super Bowl, so you know that the Goff Brockers stuff is going to get a lot of play, right? You have the whole Nigerian family aspect of it with the Akwaras and Levi and Cornell, right? And Akuda and Owarie. Like there's a whole big Nigerian community on this Lions team. You have Tracy Walker, who was in the news because his cousin was murdered. And like that is a humanizing aspect of how these players are real people and how they hurt like real people. And that is definitely something that HBO tries to do with this series, is to show that these are real people that have real feelings that hurt just like everybody else. And so, yeah, I think Tracy's going to get time. Like, and there's so many guys that have so many unique angles on this team that I think it's a gold mine of information for HBO.
Laura has just weighed in with Deuce as well. He's going to.
Oh yeah, well, the coaches alone. Oh yeah, go again. Deuce loves to talk smack. Oh my goodness, he talks smack all practice long, and the linebackers coach is usually on the wrong end of it. And so Shepard, good luck. But yeah, these coaches are very entertaining. Pleasant is a ball of energy. Randall L is exciting, and like he matches that level of energy as well. And then Campbell, you just put a mic on Campbell for 24 hours and I'd watch that feed. You know what I mean? Like, honestly. So yeah, there's a wealth of information that HBO is going to have.
Yeah. Less Hard Knocks, more Big Brother with the Detroit Lions. So we had a question while we were going through the previous stuff, and Det Fanman on YouTube has asked, where do you think Jared Davis at the moment ranks at linebacker on this roster?
Probably third or fourth, right? That's my guess. I don't think he's going to start. I think he's going to be more of like a role-playing guy right now. In a lot of ways, he's going to mirror some of the things that Derek Barnes does. And I do think that they're going to prioritize Derek Barnes over Jared Davis, but I think they have a lot of similar skill sets in the fact that they both play downhill. They're both aggressive. They're both fast. You can blitz them both. So it's almost like a redundancy there. I think Davis can be a special teamer, which is something he's really never done in the past. And that's another added feather for him. And it's possibly doesn't make the team. You know what I mean? Like, but right now I would peg him at like 3 or 4.
Tom?
Yeah, so I think fans following the Lions, and this has been the case for a few years, have obviously wanted us to prioritize linebacker. Yeah. And I remember an article you wrote last year, actually, when you were looking at the Rams scheme, and obviously it was not a position they prioritized. They got
correct.
Kaiser was a 4th rounder, and they would not quite get guys off the street, but they wouldn't value it in the same way. Do you think it's a position that this front office believes you can consciously save money on and kind of roll these guys out with day 3 picks, and fans are going to be disappointed come April when they don't see a guy taken?
Look, I agree with you. When when we studied the Rams, they used 4 guys each 50% of the time, essentially through 2 spots. Like the one guy played 50 and then he rotated with the other guy played. And that was it. They didn't really prioritize it at all. And then it shows that they didn't prioritize it because some of those guys have been cut and they're still out on the free agent wire and nobody's touching them, right? Like it just wasn't a priority of the Rams. And I expected that same thing to carry over, but then they play Anzalone like 90% of the snaps. You know what I mean? Like, and so that like tells me, okay, maybe it is more of a priority than they, and now, but then again, was Anzalone playing that many snaps because they didn't have a quality backup that they trusted, or was it because they adapt to the philosophy of wanting to play linebackers more? And that's hard to say. My guess is that they value him a little bit more than the Rams did. That's why I do think linebacker is going to be something that they try and tap into in the draft, because if they can get a guy who is fast and can contribute, you may have your tandem linebackers of the future with Derek Barnes and player X.
Okay, and just sort of to finish this off before we go on to the draft, staying with the linebacker, obviously, we've got a new linebackers coach in there now, but why do you think they let DeLeon go? I mean, they didn't put the most resources into it last year. Obviously, Collins got kicked out quite early. What do you reckon the thinking was behind that?
Yeah, it's hard to say. We never really got good answers. We couldn't tell if it was like a performance-based thing. He was with them at the Senior Bowl. He seemed to be involved. We don't really have a firm answer on that. We've both Jeremy and I have tried to find that answer out. We just have been unable to. So I don't want to speculate. But I mean, look, the performance was not what you would hope, and so it's possible that's what it was. But again, I'm guessing there.
I guess I like hypothesizing, they seem to love Kelvin Shepherd. Maybe have had something to do with it. Certainly.
Yeah. Because look, Shepherd was a guy who they really liked and they made a role for him. Okay. Like they had Wash at defensive line and then they had DeLeon at the linebackers coach. And then they had Shepherd and they're like, we want to add him, but we don't have a spot. We're going to create an outside linebacker spot. And we did that specifically to bring Kelvin Shepherd into the mix. So yeah, it's entirely possible that they just preferred him more. And with the switch to trying to show more 4-man fronts, that they were like, hey, let's move Kelvin back to his off the ball role. And which is what he played in the NFL, and just move on from there. So yeah, it could easily just be that they preferred Shepherd more.
All right. I know that we've gone on a long time, but your lovely wife has said that you will appreciate the time away from your kids. He's all yours. So we're going to carry on. We're going to move on to the draft. And we've got a few questions coming about that as well. We had a few prepared. And Anne actually had a tweet about number 2 and saying actually it's kind of almost boring at this point. But I'm going to ask one question about pick number 2, and then we're going to move on. So a lot has been asked about the top prospects in the draft. You recently had a Twitter thread on the subject, I think yesterday, maybe a 8-tweet thread about the presumed top 5 prospects and their drawbacks. Do you think the gap between the top 5 prospects is as small as it appears to the public? So it almost seems like, in contrast to previous years, there's no clear number 2, that all of these guys could be taken in terms of what we think is going on. It doesn't really feel like we've had this in years. Is that how you see it? Is it kind of really up in the air at this point, or is that just the public not knowing what they're talking about?
No, I think it's that close, because there is no perfectly clean prospect. One of the cleanest prospects is Hamilton, and then you add in his positional versatility, which is going to hurt his traditional stock of going that high, right? And so everyone kind of has their flaws, and some of those flaws are really minimal, and some of those flaws are very coachable, and some of those flaws are more personality based, I guess, and depending on what the team is looking for, I think is going to be what divides them into the different tiers. I think Hutchinson is number 1. I've had Hutchinson since, I don't know, September as my kind of number 1 guy. And nothing has swayed me from that. I think he's one of the cleaner prospects. He gets dinged for a couple of minor things that I don't think are actually even big deals anymore. You have a really unique safety. You have some good offensive tackles, which I don't think apply. And then you have these high ceiling edge rushers, a whole handful of them after that, who all have, they fit a certain style, and we don't really know what style they're looking for. Are they looking for the bendy edge rusher? Then, then Thibodeau's their guy. Are they looking for that position versatile guy like Walker? Like, we don't really know exactly what they do. Like, there's tomorrow morning, I'll have an article that tells you what I think is number one, who I think is going to be the next guy after Hutchinson. But I mean, I don't want to ruin it, but yeah, I have an idea of where I think they're going, because based on their switch, based on wanting to go to a 4-3, based on wanting to do more 1 and 2 gaps, based on setting the edge, there's a couple of guys that stand out for me above the rest. And for me, it was down to really like two to three players. But I definitely think they're going defense. I know there's a big community that thinks that Willis is going to be there. I don't buy it. The reason that I don't buy it is you get one shot at taking a quarterback. And if you take that shot, and if you look, Willis is the best quarterback in this class for the Lions, I believe. And I would understand them wanting to take him. But is he that can't miss prospect? I don't think he is. And if he's not, are you wasting your one quarterback bullet on getting him? And are you willing to wager your career that Willis is going to be your quarterback of the future? Because if you're not, you're probably out of a job in 3 years.
Not to try and influence your article last minute or anything, but you would make us all very happy here if it happened to be a certain secondary guy. So you put in our tuppence in there.
Look, I think Hamilton is he's going to be one of the best. He has the potential to be the best safety in the league. Let me put it that way. Like last year I said with Sewell's ceiling is the best tackle in the NFL. And I think Hamilton has that type of ceiling. Okay. And that's why he's in that conversation at 2. It's not because, he's not in the conversation because it's a weak class and, there's not these good, he's in the conversation because he's a good player. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there are very good edge rushers and there are very good offensive tackles. And he's in that mix when safeties in the past haven't been, because he's an exceptional player. And I'm not willing to rule him out by any stretch. I do think it's an uphill climb though, for the league to get out of its own way and ignore, the position.
Well, I mean, obviously not to give anything away that you're writing about or anything, but do you get the sense that is a decision that our front office would be able to make? Because, I mean, like you say, they don't come around very often. Like when Quentin Nelson came around as a guard, guards aren't really looked after, but every now and then one will come and book the trend. Do you get the feeling that our front office would book the trend if the right guy's there to do it and not be swayed by positional value?
Yeah, no, I think they are going to take the guy that's going to best impact their team. And I think if they believe that's safety, then I think they would take it. My trepidation with saying it will be Hamilton would be that they like Will Harris more than everyone else does. And, but I also think they might be shifting Will Harris into a different role, right? And into more of a hybrid corner safety type role. And so, it seems like a need to everyone, but I don't know if this front office thinks safety is as big of a priority as everyone else does. That being said, if you're in the business of making your team better by taking the best player available, he has to be in the conversation, right? He has to be in the conversation.
Just want to give a shout out to Quirky Zerky, who we asked one of his questions. Tom tried to get the name right. I'm not sure I've got the name right either, but he's just gifted 5 subs and then subbed himself. Thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate that. Tom, you have a question to ask.
Yeah, you touched on quarterbacks there in terms of Malik Willis specifically. Now, whilst there were rumors in the past about will the Lions move on from Stafford, this is really the first time in kind of 12, 13 years that quarterback has really been on the table for the Lions. At least last year, yes, but the next few years, it looks like you're going to have a chance to dig into a number of these guys. So is that something you're excited about? I know you speak kind of passionately about the trenches, especially, but is quarterback a position group that you're excited to start digging into with probably an extra level of depth, or is there almost a bit of nervousness going back to something like it?
Yeah, both, right? Because it's a hard position. And as good as you think you are at projecting certain positions, quarterback is really it's a dice roll in a lot of ways. And you can study these guys and you can say, I think they're going to succeed or not succeed. And then it could go completely the opposite of what you expect. For example, I really liked Josh Allen when he was coming out, but I thought he was too inconsistent and too inaccurate. And I said, I probably wouldn't take him where the Bills took him. And look how stupid I look. You know what I mean? Like, and that was a miss. That was a miss for me. Right. Yeah, but I'm saying, but that's it. Like and the idea that somebody's now going to be Josh Allen and do what Josh Allen did, I think is a hard sell for me. Like, you look at Malik Willis, who is similar inaccuracies, similar, athleticism. And for me, projecting him to be have a Josh Allen, light bulb switch on, I think it's maybe not realistic. It's like when Ajabo got hurt and they said, when he tore his Achilles in Michigan's pro day, and they said, oh, he'll be back for the season. If he's on Cam Akers' track for return. And I'm like, you can't take the exception and apply it as the rule. Right. And so that's the thing, is we're looking at some of these rare success stories at quarterback and saying, well, of course this guy can do it because this guy did it. Well, for every Josh Allen, there's a Jake Locker. Right. And if you don't remember Jake Locker, that's why. He was in the same draft as Christian Ponder, if you recall him, who went to the Vikings, right? Like that draft was horrible at quarterback. And it was because people panicked and said, look, I think we got to reach, we got to get somebody. We think you can't do that in the NFL anymore. Like, you can't gamble at the position. So I'm excited to look at them, but at the same time, I'm very unnerved by wanting to put my name on, this is the best guy. You know what I mean? Because it's so unpredictable. And there's so many factors that go into quarterback success: where they land, who their coaches are, do they have the right system around them? Like and if it doesn't hit the right way, then he could bust. You know what I mean? Like, so I'm definitely excited, but equally nervous.
I guess the thing that I want to follow up with that is that, in difference to last year, where I feel like that was one guy with a super high floor and super low ceiling, and a lot of guys with upside but really low floors, this is a class that has really high floors. Really high floors. Not sure on the ceiling though. So Willis is the exception to that.
Yeah.
Corral maybe fits into that a little bit, but otherwise, I think Pickett has a high floor. I think that since Ridder has a high floor, I think Strong, knee accepting, has a high floor. But I'm kind of worried about the upside for those guys. And if there's one thing in the NFL that you kind of want to avoid, it's an okay quarterback, because I don't know how much you buy into the kind of idea that an average quarterback holds you back because you don't win with that and you don't get a high draft pick from that. But that's not what you want. You want the high guy, or you don't want anyone. So it's a completely different class to what we've seen recently.
Yeah, you have a quarterback, or you're looking for a quarterback, right? That's what the NFL is. And right now, the Lions are looking for a quarterback. And I think you can get away with a certain level of quarterback if you have a really established team. But if you don't have that established team, then you can stunt a quarterback's growth and you can stunt their developmental ceiling. Like, if you took Malik Willis and you put him on the Lions roster right now and you had him start, you would stunt his development. Like, in Chicago right now, the GM said, if Justin Fields doesn't improve, we possibly may move on from him. They took him in the first round last year. And the new GM is already like, well, if we have to write him off, we write him off. Like, it's stunning to me, like how quickly we can flip, how quickly, if these guys are not in the right situation, how easily they can just collapse, right? And so I don't know, I think Fields is an excellent example of this. If he struggles and they move on from him, that's a problem. If you take a Malik Willis and you put him on this roster, you could have a problem, and you could stunt his development, and you could limit his ceiling. And so I don't think it's the right time for the Lions. I think they need to get a little stronger first.
Even with offensive lines, the best landing spot for a rookie quarterback. But sorry.
I know. I hear you. I was
just about to say, could you see them flipping and going later in the draft and going for the development guy instead?
It'd have to be the right one. Yeah. No. Yeah. It'd have to be the right guy, right? It'd have to be. I could see Coral. I could see Ritter. But here's the thing. If I don't like the idea of taking them at 32, but I don't want to take them at 34 because then you don't get that 5th-year option, right? And so I'm not in the camp of saying take a guy and see if he can develop, because it's potentially wasting a pick or just getting a really good backup, right? I would understand the concept, but if I'm going to take a quarterback, I want the best quarterback in the class, and I want the one that's the best for me. And I think the spot that they're in right now and the way that they're building their roster, they're going to want the first 5 picks, the top 100 picks that they have, to all come in and have significant roles. And if you use one of those on a quarterback, I don't know if you're using, if you're going to be allocating that draft capital properly, because unless he's going to be a guy that's going to be your starter next year, I don't know if it makes sense to get him, because if you just trade one middling quarterback for another middling quarterback that just costs less money, how much are you really improving your team other than financially?
I mean, I guess this is sort of, I'm talking more, I guess, about day 3s, like sort of the late round development guys. I mean, obviously there's Ellaby out of Western Michigan. There's guys like that. Could you see them doing that and at least trying to force competition between 2 and 3? Because obviously Boyle and Blau are back, but could that be a route they might take, you reckon?
Yeah, I think you could see that. I think, again, it's a competition based system, right? I think they've set themselves up where they don't have to force anything. But if they liked what they saw out of like Bailey Zappi at the Senior Bowl, and Bailey Zappi sitting there at their 5th round pick, and they're like, hey, he could push for QB2. Well, yeah, I could certainly see them taking that approach. But at the same time, I could also see them saying, we're comfortable with what we got.
Just adding a question from one of our guys, actually, in a minute. If I'm going to ask it now. Screw it. Why not? Ash has returned from his horror film and is enjoying the pod, and he's asking, my fellow Damone Clark admirer, Eric, where would you take that lovely beast of a linebacker now he's going to potentially have to medically redshirt his rookie year?
Yeah. I actually wrote a quick piece on this last Friday, and I said, if it was up to me, and I felt like he was going to be able to return to health, like they're projecting him to be able to return to health, I still am under that philosophy that those first 5 guys have to contribute, which means he's probably not going to be, I'm not going to take him at pick 97, but I also don't think he's going to last till pick 177. So I would take a similar approach to what they did with Derek Barnes last year and take like a 4th round pick and maybe a 4th round pick next year, and try and get a 4th rounder this year and maybe a 7th this year as well, and then try and grab him there. Because with day 3s, you're really just rolling the dice on these guys, and 4th rounders have more hit consistency than like your 5th and 6th guys, right? 5th and 6th round guys. But so if you have a guy that you like, who, even if he's going to sit a year that's on day 3, I think it's worth trying to go be aggressive and go get him. So he'd have to fall to the right spot. You'd have to feel comfortable with what you're giving up, but I wouldn't mind giving up a day 3 pick this year and next year to try and get a guy like Clark.
We obviously have 5 top 100 picks, but you talk about that big gap of it's kind of 80, I think, before we go. do you see the Lions moving around in the first couple of days to try and get some extra picks in that fourth round? Or potentially, I guess, in a different way looking at it, do you think that they'll try and prioritize picks going into 2023?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, the 2023 angle, because they have 9 picks, and that's a pretty fair amount. And I know, like, if they traded down and they ended up with 10 or 11 picks, we talked a little bit earlier about how they're kind of up against it from a roster standpoint. Like, they don't, trying to add 11 guys in any one season, it can be daunting, right? So but I could see them trying to trade down and acquire a pick from next year, or trade up and give up a pick from next year in order to try and get to a spot where they like a player. Because there's that big gap in the fourth round. And remember, that's where they got Amon-Ra. That's where they got Derek Barnes last year, right? I could definitely see them trying to hit into that range, because they moved up from the 5th all the way up into the top of the 4th to get Derek Barnes. Like, that was an aggressive move. And I don't think Brad Holmes would be scared of doing that again.
The other question I actually had about that was just that, because the Lions seem to have strength in depth, but they don't have elite talent, and they have 9 picks total, I think it is, or maybe 9.
Yep,
so
9.
That seems like a lot of picks, considering depth is not the issue. Do you see the Lions prioritizing trading up or back to 2023? But potentially up is my thing here. So I hate trading up. It's against my mantra. Like,
Sure.
It's not something I want to do, but I'm looking at the number of picks, and I've done potentially hundreds of mock drafts at this point, because my work is boring, and what am I going to do? So, and every time I come out of it thinking, I've got 7 starters here, potentially, and I'm like, where are they going to start? This is too many players, and like, using a 7th to move up 10 picks might get your guy, or something like that. Do you see them prioritizing trying to move up to get their guy? Because Brad tried to do that last year, right? We know that very
with Levi.
Yeah,
with Levi. He tried to move up into the 1st to get Levi, and they said, be patient. We expect him to be there, right? And so I don't think it's out of the question that he would do that. I could see them going both ways. I think if they trade back, it's going to be to try and get a pick in the future. I don't think it's going to be to try and amass more picks this year. But I could also then, see them trying to trade up if they think that they got to get their guy, because they traded up twice, or once, tried to trade up twice last year, right? So I'm with you in that trading up does go against my nature, but if they have a guy that they think that isn't going to be there at the spot that they're at, and they want him, and he's a game changer, then go get him. They showed last year that they know what they're doing, and they're pretty good at finding guys, and you have to trust that they can do it again. And there's these guys still have to develop, but they're all ascending in the right direction.
And even if Brad wants to do it, potentially he's going to be talked down by some other guys in the room, and they're only going to do it if everyone's on the same page.
Certainly. Yeah, like, you have a lot of strong voices in that room. And while Holmes has the last decision, Dorsey, I think what Dorsey does for them is really underrated, because as a former GM, he has always been opinionated, and I almost think that he is like the devil's advocate in the room, like, to say, hey, what if we don't do that? What if we do, and I think he gives them like a different perspective, because in his past stops, he has been kind of the agitator, and that's cost him. Like, I think in Detroit, though, they're asking him to play that role a little bit more, and like help them look at things from a different perspective. And I think that causes them some pause on certain guys, and keeps Brad from jumping back up into the first round to get Levi. Can you imagine if they jumped up into the first round to get Levi and then he didn't play well? Like, can you imagine how mad the fans would have been? So, and I think it was Dorsey that talked him down from it. He might have even said it was Dorsey, if I recall correctly. But they have a lot of really strong minds, and it's a good thing to have in that room right now.
You mentioned, obviously, we touched on day 3 a little bit. You get to talk about the pick at 2 a lot, 32 a lot, etc. Who's the one prospect that you never get to talk about but love to watch in this draft?
Oh boy.
Or some of the guys that you don't, they're not first round buzz guys, but you just love watching them, and they maybe are more of a day 3 guy.
I like Veluz Jones from Tennessee, the receiver, who's like kind of a receiver running back combo. I liked what he did at the combine. I thought his tape was a little inconsistent, but I thought he had some potential. He's not exactly what they need roster wise, but he's an interesting. He's. It's kind of like with Khalif here. They're with Khalif here, honey. No
Hugs.
Oh wait. With Khalif here, it kind of takes away from his the need for a guy like Veluz Jones, right? But he's a very interesting guy to me, where if they wanted to challenge Khalif, like a guy like him might make some sense. Let me flip through my chart a little bit here and see if I forgot some other guys. Some of the guys that I thought were day 3 are now like considered like day 2s now. And that's like Cam Jurgens, right? The Nebraska center. Like, I'm like, this is a day 3 guy. Nobody's talking about him. Like he's probably not going to go there. And I love this guy. I love his attitude. I love his like run a guy 50 yards down the field and bury him into the sidelines, of the bench. And now they're like, oh no, he's going in the 3rd round now. And I'm like, well, okay, I don't have him anymore. Go ahead. I interrupted you. I apologize.
Well, so I mean, in the chat, Troy Anderson was mentioned. I think is that the Montana State linebacker?
Everybody loves him.
Everyone loves him now, but there's several wide receivers in that range. You mentioned one, but there's Jalen Naylor, there's Eric Ezukama, is his name. Ryan mentioned him.
Danny Gray.
There's
Gray's
loads
in there too. Yeah.
Romeo Dubs sometimes gets mentioned. So I think Pro Football Network have him at like 180 or something, which is wild to me.
Okay.
Like, it's just crazy.
I think he's a little bit better than that. I don't think I have like Gray and Dubs in like the same like kind of tier, like where I think maybe they're there in the 5th. Probably not. But if they were there in the 5th, they are both interesting guys. Gray's like 6 foot, but he runs like a 4.3. He's a good vertical guy. He could push for that like kind of that Josh Reynolds type role. He could be your Josh Reynolds of the future. Dubs he's more of a vertical guy, but he's a little bit bigger, so he's got a little bit more positional versatility. I like him in the 4th. That's where I think is a good spot for them. But like you said, there are a couple of analysts that have those guys both lower. So I mean, it's a round difference. If they were there in the 5th, great. But those are the types of guys where if for whatever reason they end up going defense with like their first 5 picks, and they've got to get a receiver in the 4th. Yeah, I mean, those guys would be interesting additions in that 4th round.
I think we are slowly getting to the end of the questions. I think there's 3 more or so, but Ant, sorry.
Okay. No, I was just going to move on with questions, or have you got anything else? So Big Aries 70 asks us on Twitch. So we're talking about the rounds here, but the 2nd round history of the Lions is well known. We've struggled there a lot over the years. Do you reckon there's anything that is it just literally we've landed on the 1-1s, or do you reckon there's anything specifically they can do to change around that perception? I mean, obviously Levi was drafted last year. I guess they knew about his medical history when they did it, but is there something specific towards it? Or we just been a bit too clever with the picks and just need to go with the solid ones? Well,
I think historically the problems have been that they've gone skill players in that 2nd round. You're talking about Ryan Broyles, a whole bunch of running backs, right? From Carry On to Mikel LaShore, right? Like, so a lot of these guys that are skill players, but they just didn't pan out, right? And but when you look back at like why those guys were picked where they were, there was so for example, like with LaShore and Broyles, that was Martin Mayhew. And at the time, the salary cap was different. right? And Mayhew was working against the salary cap, and he was having to try and add talent at different spots because the roster was very void of talent at the time, and he needed to take gambles. And so he gambled that Ryan Broyles ACL wasn't going to be a problem. He gambled that Mikel Leshore was going to be able to, he had a couple of off-field things that he had to get past, right? And then he ended up blowing his Achilles out, and that's what, I mean, his was kind of a freak injury anyways. But like at the time, Mayhew gambled a lot in the second round, and he gambled on guys that had issues, and he did that because he thought you were getting more talent. What you'll notice about Mayhew's drafts is his day 3 drafts, the guys he took on day 3 were almost always safe picks. Quandre Diggs went in that 5th round, like in the 6th round, right? Like he took guys that were safer in round 3 when he was trying to get more core guys, but he gambled early. Like look at, Nick Fairley in the 1st round, like that was a gamble because, and he had to do that to try and infuse talent. And so, yeah, there was this big history that the Lions get associated with those like kind of day 2 picks is that they never hit. Well, they didn't hit because, most of them were gambles, and unfortunately, most of them didn't pan out. And then since then, you've seen Carry-On, you've seen Swift, right? These are guys, again, that are skill players. And the way that the running back position is in the NFL is the shelf life for a running back is pretty minimal, right? And so investing in running backs in that round, in the 2nd round or on day 1 or day 2, it's not always the best use of resources because they don't last. So I think so you have to kind of take a bigger picture perspective and say, I don't think the 2nd round is necessarily cursed. It was just the way that the GM had to approach the team at the time.
Talking about trying to get value and trying to be as nuanced as possible with this question, because it's one I wrote and it's a bit out there, but we'll go with it. There's a lot of talk about the fact that the Lions want to take best player available, and I've had a long talk with what best player available means with various people in the kind of Discord community that we have. And a lot of people think the best player available means, at this pick, this is the best player on the board, so I'm taking him. And I've argued against that being the meaning of best player available. And so the question is, effectively, trying to evaluate to the entire draft in terms of the strength and depth of all of the positions in the draft, trying to statistically brute force all of the different scenarios in terms of if I take this player here, then that's no longer a need, and so I'm not going to prioritize that later on. And so if you look at this draft, there seems to be a lot of edges going in round 1, but it tails off quickly. There seems to be a lot of strength and depth at linebacker and at wide receiver, and so maybe you can push them a bit further down. Mm-hmm. If you were trying to view it through the GM lens in terms of looking at the strength and depth and the BPA approach, do you have an idea of how you would like the Lions to go in terms of maximizing the total draft output?
Yeah. It's really about where do you think the positional depth lands, right? Like in my mind, there's certain positions that the strength is higher, and then there's other positions where it's kind of, it's in the middle, and another where it's a little bit late, right? And so like my philosophy with an edge rusher is the model says the higher you draft an edge rusher, the greater the likelihood of that edge rusher succeeding, because edge rushers are typically successful because of athleticism. The athletic guys usually get drafted first. And if you look back, like historically, most of the top edge rushers were all drafted in like the first 30 picks. I'd say like it's something like 85-90% of the top edge rushers are all drafted in round 1. That's just the way it tends to work. And so can you find an edge rusher at 32? Yes. But is that a comparable edge rusher that you're going to find at 2? Absolutely not. There's going to be a big gap between them, right? And so I tend to prioritize edge rushers higher, right? But then a position like cornerback or safety, you can find more value in this class in the second round, in the third round, because there's more depth. It's not elite depth, but there's a lot of kind of depth in the middle where guys that, you know, are right on the fringe of being potential starters, or maybe even, you know, pushing their way up. And so I think the way that like teams approach this is, I know like a lot of like systems will say like, okay, I'm putting a number on a player, and like, then this is the number and this is the order. But when teams do the best player available, they don't just check off the next guy on the board. Like there has to be a reasonable, logical reason for why they're going to prioritize one position or another. The grades are what they are, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to take the highest graded player if that player is at a position that you don't necessarily need, right? So yeah, so you kind of have to encompass this whole thing, and then teams will look at players and say, they put little labels on them that say, what can this guy do for me? Like, we believe this guy has like this grade, but he is a starter at safety, where we believe this other guy who has a similar grade is a backup at tackle. You know what I mean? Right. So like, that's how teams look at it. They're not just saying what's the number and take the highest number. They have to look at what they label each of these guys. What is the role that they're going to have with the organization? And that's how the best player available works, essentially, I guess. So when I look at this draft, the strength for me at the top is you've got more edge rushers, and you've got that one safety that's just sitting there, smirking at you, right? But then when you get to 32, the edge rushers drop off. You'll probably have some athletic edge rushers, but they'll have big flaws. Like Boy Mafe is one that everyone loves to pair with the Lions at like 32, but he's not good at setting the edge. And if you can't set the edge, you're not going to start. And so if you're drafting him at 32, he's an edge. He's a pass rushing specialist. He's Julian Aquara is what he is. And so are you taking Julian Aquara at 32? You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not trying to demean him, because that's not where he is. He's not to that point yet. And so so there's a big gap. There's a lot more depth at linebacker, safety, and wide receiver at those kind of pick 32, 34s. And then even at 66, there's still like some really nice depth. Safety kind of falls off before 66, in my opinion, but you can still find linebackers. You can still find wide receivers there. So when you're looking at this class and you're saying, hey, if I had, if I could take any approach that I want, I would look at them and say, take your best edge rusher at the top, take your best whatever safety corner or safety linebacker or wide receiver at your 32, 34s, take two of those guys, and then try and get the next one at 66. Now, this isn't an ideal world, and so it's probably not going to go in that order, but that's kind of the approach I would take. And if safety's not going to be there at 66, then you want to take one of those safeties at 32, 34, because I think those guys that are there, the Briskers, the Hills, the Scenes, those guys could start. And you could get them at that spot, whereas an edge rusher at that spot isn't going to start. And that's why, so that would be my approach, and looking at kind of how this draft is weighted. Now, will it play out like that? No, absolutely not. But that's the approach that I would take if I was the GM. That would be my kind of game plan.
Laura's just said, in reply to someone else in the chat, but Erik sparks controversy like Mr. Rogers. It's all data and numbers and facts and fit and blah, blah, blah. Which I thought was a really nice comment. Does someone want to take the last kind of toss-up light question to finish this off?
Sure, I'll do it. And this is coming from someone who's never been to Detroit, although hopefully that will change in 2 years' time, if not before. What is your favorite Detroit bar?
There's the thing with we've seen in Detroit is that we've seen it used to be a lot of not as almost like microbrewery type bars, like a lot of like local breweries that would come up that started putting up restaurants that were attached to them. now we're starting to see some of the bigger beer companies in the state putting restaurants up or bars up downtown as well. So there's a nice combination of them. It's hard to, I don't know. Like they have a new Founders one. I haven't been to the Founders one, but I enjoy Founders. I've been to, if there's a Witch's Brew that was down there. I don't know, it really depends what you're looking for. It really does. It's the point I guess I'm getting at is that it's very eclectic now, right? It started out with these like kind of small localized bars down there, and now they're getting a little bit bigger, but they're still maintaining a lot of like the local brewery from the state type of feel to them, and that's I think what's really cool about being downtown now is that you can find all these like little these like homegrown Michigan breweries, and if you can get me to one of those, that's exciting for me.
Right, well, I'll trust you to scout them out, and then when we come over, we can have a beer at one of those.
Deal.
NFL Draft 2024. It's actually stimulated a bit of conversation there. Alien Visitors have found Detroit is good beer and food. Favorite bar, says Brandon Kerr, asked Jeff Risden. And Laura has said he doesn't leave the house much. We have 3 children under 10. Crying, laughing face. I imagine that very much.
I told them you're coming to Thanksgiving dinner.
Yes, it's happening.
I invited them. They said they were coming for the Thanksgiving dinner, and I said I make a mean turkey and stuffing. True. So
I have to work, but
they're involved.
I'll be there when I get home.
Yes, you can come for the charcuterie. He'll come later.
Right. I love it.
Eric, all you thought was it was going to be an hour-long interview, and yet now you've got us all coming over for Thanksgiving dinner. You're way more than you bargained for here.
It's going to be a really interesting day because if we do come over, I was indoctrinated to Lions Thanksgiving by Crackman. I'm sure you must know Crackman, but he was pouring Fireball whiskey down my throat from the bottle at 7 in the morning in tailgating for that day, and it was one of the most exciting / horrific days of my life. So there we go. Eric, we've kept you more than long enough, so thank you so much for giving your time to us and just chatting about everything and everything.
It was a lot of fun.
It's been great. Thank you for everyone in the chat who's been contributing questions. There's too many of you to mention, so normally I would go through, but I can't. It's been great, and I'm sure that Eric's been the guy to bring you all here. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please don't forget to follow us on our socials, Royal Lions UK, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, Twitter, all of that good stuff. Don't forget Eric's podcast, so Detroit Lions Breakdown Podcast, Pride of Detroit, but also the Patreon for Detroit Lions Breakdown Podcast. If you want to get access to his draft board, you need to do it there. As you've heard from this already, it's one of the more comprehensive ones you can get out there, and it's $4. And if you get it in 3 days' time, you'll have it through the draft. So go and do that. For my co-hosts, along with me, Ant and Tom, thank you for asking questions for me. My name is Matthew Turner. To Eric, thank you. We will see you next time on the Royal Lions UK podcast. Let's go Lions, one pride.
One pride.
One pride.